Good morning, gentlemen. How's
Good
everybody doing?
morning.
Living the dream.
We're here a little bit earlier today from our perspective, so yeah, it's definitely still morning, so all good.
Nice and sunny out.
Yep,
Got the
exactly.
morning
Good,
coffee, right, Jordan?
good day.
Yeah, it's almost noon for me, so I got my early afternoon coffee.
The iced coffee going on.
All wired
Coffee
up.
number 2.
Awesome. All right, guys.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
I think we can kind of just maybe dive right in. I know, Sammy, you said you wanted to kind of kick us off this week and had something more on the fun side of things. I think it was the words you used. So, what do you have for
Yeah.
us?
Well, it's maybe not fun for the business owner, but for us, it's always fun to talk about something a little bit different. Actually, this one's a little bit more low tech than we're used to, but it's an insider threat story. So I thought that was kind of interesting because we don't always read about those, and it's a lot harder to detect when those happen. So it was interesting to see this one in the news. But basically, the owner of a Jimmy John's franchise out in Sunset Hills, Missouri, was a victim of employee embezzlement. It totaled around about $100,000. Basically, this store wasn't incentivizing customers to insist upon receiving a receipt. So the owner was unaware that basically when they were receiving payment for a meal, the employees could simply cancel the transaction, provide the food and the change, and just pocket the rest of the money or the cost of the meal itself. And so he noticed this by basically realizing the discrepancies in the days that they worked versus the day that he worked, and noticed that the daily revenue on the days that he worked were a lot higher. So while not a VEC attack or anything like that, it's just kind of an interesting case in how, a low-tech scam and insider threats are still very relevant today, even at the small business level. So, in this situation, oftentimes organizations are kind of reluctant to reach out or involve authorities because they feel that it may do more, the media coverage might do more harm than good. So in this scenario, and how most employers tend to deal with this is, or should deal with this is, to basically contact the IRS, as they can discreetly handle the situation by performing an audit to investigate the embezzlement notifications from the employer. But in general, though, I think this kind of leads to a larger conversation about insider threat, how to combat it, and what organizations should kind of implement to, prevent these things from occurring. Whether that be, means of detection, deterrence, or a response program for when these things occur. In this particular case, I think the solution was somewhat elegant and simple, and that would just be to incentivize customers to ask for receipts. That way, they can do adequate correlation and audit of the daily revenue. Other things they could potentially look into are things like screen capture and video log correlation to identify discrepancies throughout the day. So yeah, kind of an interesting insider threat one here.
Yeah, was this a high-level employee or a low-level employee? Was this a minimum wage worker or somebody who had authority?
This is actually funny you mentioned it was a management couple. So they were a husband and wife who were the managers of the location. So they definitely have privileged access.
That's the most ironic part. When I was reading the article, is that basically they wanted to have the same days off, so the owner stepped in for those 2 days, and he's like, it's kind of funny that I have more cash coming in these days than the other days, but this is a good reason to do job rotations.
Separation of
inside
duties.
organizations have those separation of duties in place, because banks do this. They rotate through who has access to certain things. The mandatory vacation clauses where you have to take the 2 weeks off and other people have to take on those job duties and responsibilities, that helps prevent these type of scenarios. But I love the $10 offer, or if you don't get a receipt, get a free meal type of thing, because that really does bring up the whole thing. But I'm also noticing a lot of places you go to, they don't even take cash anymore.
Right.
So that gets rid of that issue overall.
Definitely a harder scam to pull if you're not accepting cash.
Yeah, I mean, if it's all done through the credit card, right? I mean, it's all digitized and it's easy to be transacted and traced essentially, right? And most places will say, hey, like, do you want a receipt on these, credit card type things? And it's like, hey, no, or email me, which I think we all get enough spam. We don't want to do that. But Like this makes a good reason as to why they would do that. Or if you are paying cash, just hand you the receipt regardless whether you ask for it or not. That way you know it's like, hey, this has been fully optimized and transacted. And I think to your point, Brian, is like in my opinion, I think there's less and less cash out there just in general, people using it. It's another reason people are using digital payments like say Apple Pay or credit cards or whatever. It's a little bit more robust in these types of issues moving forward. So it's just an interesting, like you said, Tammy, a little bit of low tech approach, but potentially also if the team was a little bit more, hey, let's not take the same days off and maybe got a little bit too greedy with it, probably could have gone on even longer, honestly, too. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure they could have fine-tuned their access control policies a little bit more, or added additional monitoring onto the systems themselves. But I think for the most part, to your point, it was kind of a really elegant, low-tech solution to solve this problem. But ultimately, I think it's kind of an ongoing battle against that mentality of a malicious insider to kind of really mitigate that, and everything else is just kind of compensating controls around it. So yeah, very interesting story.
One thing I was thinking about is that if this was perpetrated by lower level employees, they may have needed authorization in order to cancel the transactions. That way it wasn't reported. But because of their privileged position within the organization, they were able to take advantage of that. And so even if there was the strategies put into place that we've discussed, you still have the challenge of, if you have untrustworthy people in management or positions of authority inside of your organization, you still run the risk of them evading and mitigating the intent of those controls. So in a cybersecurity perspective, that's very important as well, to recognize the importance of not only hiring good people and paying them well enough that they are not incentivized to take from the till, but also to be monitoring and managing their access. And like you said, cycling through the responsibilities there, I think would help a lot.
Oh, they were paid well for
Yeah.
Missouri. I mean, they were making well over $100,000. I think that's probably combined, but still, the owner had paid them a lot of money for sure.
Yeah, I didn't speak to it in the article, but I'm really curious what the background check data pulled in, if they had any kind of criminal history or anything like that. It's not always the case that it's somebody with a criminal background that performs these kinds of attacks. So just
they saw an opportunity and maybe ran with it. So like you said, low tech sometimes pays off, but in the end, it's still a fraud to the business. So that type of thing does suck for the small business owner, because like I think the way his sign was written was pretty like, hey, I have to close for a few days to handle this, and he's still paying like franchise fees and other things. So it's just unfortunate, really, overall. So.
Well, that's a huge one, is the business impact of the franchise fees. I mean, that could sink you right there, because that's usually a good chunk of your revenue, or well, not revenue, but the profit ends up going back to the franchise itself. And so he's stuck having to pay that, even though he didn't collect the money.
Yep. So Sammy, may be fun, but not so fun, sir.
It's a unique one.
Well, now I'm hungry and want a sandwich.
I don't know about Jimmy John's, though. I'll leave it at that.
Throwing
I
shade
didn't say
on
where, but
okay, there you go. All right, that's funny.
Well, shall I bring it to something a little bit more serious here?
Let's go for it, Jordan. What do you got?
Turn it up.
I was reading this press release from the NSA. It's actually the NSA, CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Administration, and the FBI put out a joint cybersecurity advisory last week, indicating that they've identified these Chinese hacking groups, and they specifically said Chinese backed. So that suggests that they are working on authority of the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China. These groups have actually infiltrated network service providers, so internet service providers. They didn't name names, but I'm assuming that it's probably some pretty large groups. Apparently, what these threat actors have been doing is identifying vulnerabilities within the ISP themselves and exploiting them, not only to gain access to the information that the ISPs can provide, and also to be able to siphon traffic that's going through it, so then they can monitor and exfiltrate data that's going through the ISP network, but also so that they could use their ISP infrastructure as the attackers' command and control infrastructure. or at least to proxy their own traffic through these trusted networks. And this highlights just such an incredibly, first of all, a complex operation that these threat actors are going through. But secondly, the importance of securing this supply chain, the communication chain, and a trusted service provider like this can really lead to the exploitation of innumerable downstream customers or even unaffiliated people, organizations, because now they are seeing traffic coming from a trusted ISP without naming names and saying, well, that's from that ISP infrastructure, that should be trusted transaction there. They even compromised ISP accounts, got into the radius servers. They were able to modify the ISP routers so that then they were able to set up their own routes, capture traffic that was going through, and exfiltrate data out of that network, out of the ISP infrastructure into their own controlled infrastructure. And the press release here has this really great graphic that kind of gives an overlay of how they've used publicly available tools or even commercial tools to scan for these vulnerabilities in the network devices, gained access through unpatched internet-facing services, obtained access, server credentials, modified the routers, and performed their own attacks there. So it's just another example here of previously known, already publicly known vulnerabilities on publicly facing infrastructure, very critical publicly facing infrastructure that was exploited by threat actors, and highlights the importance of performing penetration tests and vulnerability assessments, not just internally, but also on your external systems as well.
Yeah, this is a very, I'd say, scary one, and kind of, somewhat near and dear to my heart, coming from like a networking background and having worked with large ISPs over the years, and the complexity they have. And they are very big prime targets, like you say, right? I mean, there's sometimes thousands or 10,000s of nodes that they manage. There's hundreds of engineers in there at different levels. There's, massive access to be gained. And, packets don't lie, as we kind of like to say, right? So if you can kind of control the traffic and redirect it and, siphon things one way, I mean, you can see everything, right? I mean, as simple as that. So you can gather a lot of intel on people. You can gather a lot of intel around your potential target, if you will. You can, to your point, use it as a attack vector with tens of thousands of IPs and essentially kind of bots, if you will, to do that attack. So yeah, very, very scary stuff out there. And I think we've seen similar, kind of, this is somewhat with the T-Mobile issue from several months ago, where it was a few, I believe, like unpatched kind of public facing routers that were getting access to, and then essentially jump through the network right at that point. So very scary stuff out there, and something that needs to be, in my opinion, really monitored. And ISPs have a pretty big diligence to, like, the public, in my opinion, because we all have to rely on them for our internet access, right? And it's a very, very scary system. And the other thing too, it's like, if you think about how the internet really works, is it hasn't changed in 30 plus years. I mean, a lot of the protocols are the same. Yeah, there's some security around them, but speaking holistically, there's a lot of potential gaps in just how these types of large scale systems really work and how they play together. So interesting one out there for sure.
Yep, and it comes back to some of the micro-segmentation conversations, just thinking about having those management networks separated as well, and then being able to authenticate continuously who's accessing the network and do they still have authorization to be in there. I mean, you go and disable an account and the token still works for several hours before it tries to go refresh. I mean, that's the type of world we live in, but we got to get a little more instant when we detect those things, and we got to be able to turn them off faster.
Well, Brian, looking at the top network exploits that were highlighted by the NSA here, we've got multiple CVEs from Cisco dating back to 2018, Citrix, Draytech, D-Link, Fortinet, Mikrotik, Netgear. This RCE, remote code execution vulnerability on the Netgear device, was from 2017. And then also
nobody
Pulse
patches
networking.
Netgear.
Well, there's a whole
Still,
list here, so it's not even just Netgear. The point being that I'm making is that these are known vulnerabilities that have existed for up to 5 years now. So there's definitely some patch management that needs to occur with these organizations.
Totally agree.
Yeah,
It's a recurring theme on this show.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it also makes me wonder how many unnecessary services they have available on the internet anyways. It's like, are these unpatched because nobody's using them? That's often the real reason, is that they're not aware that these things are out of date, because the last time anybody used this system was in 2017. So I think there's something to be said about, going through and actually disabling or minimizing your attack surface here. Because if they have all of these different things exposed, Netgear, Cisco, Citrix, like how many of these are critical to your perimeter environment and need to actually be accessible from the internet? So,
Yep.
disabling external management capabilities and out of band management networks is also like a big part of this, in my opinion.
And we don't
Well, that's
know
why
who these ISPs are. Some of them may be major, some of them may be minor. So there's those considerations to take in mind too, that managing or even knowing what your network inventory is harder the
Yeah.
more complex your organization is, and also harder the smaller your organization is if you don't have those resources.
That's why I'm a huge fan of having a VPN and locking down those services and not being publicly enabled. I mean, you go back to the pandemic, people were walking out the door and enabling RDP protocol so they could remote right back into the network with no VPN on. You're leaving more attack surface there. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
VPNs are perfect by any means. They're subject to their own vulnerabilities, but it's a start.
Yeah. I
Certainly
think, Sammy,
agree.
to your say
Go
just
ahead.
real quick, I think to your point, about reducing your kind of surface risk on the outside, sometimes there's things that we leave, protocols running or ports open or, things turned on by default that were maybe useful, 10, 15 years ago that are still kind of default. And it's like, hey, we should be turning these things off. And, if I think about from an ISP perspective, you have this kind of concept of security versus like network break fix. Like, think about how many tickets and calls they get. Like, hey, my customer's angry, they can't get to the internet. Sometimes you maybe have a different kind of engineer or skill set level in there, just saying, well, let me make these changes, not really, aware of the unintended maybe security consequences of, okay, well, it works now, customer's happy, cool, let's get them back and running, and not going in there and saying, well, let's go ahead and tighten this back up, down the road. So there's a lot of, I think, process too that can be improved in those situations.
Well, a common one that's left open nowadays is port 80. And the reason they
Yeah,
leave it open is for the redirect. Well, most browsers and devices nowadays will automatically try SSL. So
yeah,
that's one of those things that could go back and start looking at, well, can we just turn it off? Is it really necessary to have that redirect in place anymore?
yeah. Good stuff. So kind of maybe going back in time a little bit here, only just a few years ago from 2019, I think we were all aware of a pretty significant breach that happened that year with Capital One. A little bit of updates on this one. The person, basically found responsible, and they could have been charging her and burning through everything, has been officially convicted from a wire fraud and a few other accounts from the 100 million essentially records that were breached from Capital One in 2019. So it sounds like the juror took about 7 or 8 days to kind of go through everything. No convictions been essentially sentenced yet, but it's happening in September. But it could be potentially up to 25 years in prison. It was a pretty significant, event that happened. I think we were all aware of this at different points in time. It was all over the news. It raised a lot of questions about, consumer security, cybersecurity, and it kind of, I guess, in a positive light, if you want to look at it this way, it did bring a lot of attention to like this field, and I think it allowed people to kind of really step up in some regard. But it's just unfortunate it takes these large scale events and whatnot. So just some updates on that one. That things are moving forward with that case, and there'll be some sentencing here in September. So we'll see kind of what happens. But it does show that cybercrime from a prosecution perspective is still to be something that's very serious and taken not very lightly. So I think we've had kind of conversations about this in the past about hacking back and potentially kind of going back after people, and this kind of whole concept of cyber warfare that has been escalating. It's just showing us that the at least from like a U.S. perspective, they're taking it very seriously in how they potentially prosecute and assess time and penalty to these situations. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, not worth it. I mean, the career is done.
Yeah,
Like the amount of money and stuff you could have made after all that, it just, yeah, gone from that perspective. And if I remember, maybe this person was found, I'm a little rusty on it 'cause it's been a little while, but I think, didn't they have some drops in their VPN that they were trying to shield, and that's how they were able to detect this person?
Yeah, it was also a little bit of bragging too. I think like on GitHub there were some brags like, hey, this was done. And then there was a pretty, I guess as Sandy would say, like not a very good OPSEC and kind of like a decent trail, if you will, left along type of thing. So a little bit of that, hey, maybe it wasn't always about money and about the notoriety of like I could do this, which we've seen an increase in cases and things like that too. So just a reminder for those of you out there, Capital One was fined $80 million in 2020. And then in December 21, they agreed to pay out about $190 million in class action lawsuit, plus the cost of everything else. So that was a very significant financial and business impact to Capital One over the years and compromise as well as brand reputation. So again, just shows you how impactful these things can be, not just from a monetary perspective, but to everything behind the scenes. So
I want to add that everyone who was involved at Capital One in investigating this, as well as the law enforcement in order to bring this person to justice, they were all very lucky that in this case, it was not organized crime, because organized crime would have laid much lower. In my view, I did a case study on this for my previous employer. In my personal view, this person wanted to get caught. Their handle was erratic. They were well known on hacker forums. They were open about the attacks that they were performing, if not the particular targets, but it was clear from the information that they provide where the information was coming from. They kept on putting out information at an increasing pace and rate until they were caught. And it seemed, from my personal view, that this person was almost upset that they weren't getting the notoriety, the recognition for their skills, for their knowledge, for their ability to exploit this. They weren't trying to. There were some instances where this person offered the data for sale, but it to me didn't seem like that was their priority.
right,
Whereas if this was a hacking group associated with a nation state, North Korea, Russia, China, just as examples, but also Vietnam and several others, they would have been exploiting this in depth. And they would have been concealing the fact that they had this access and this information and squirreling it away for later use. Furthermore, it would have been much harder to bring this person to justice, even if they had been identified, because this perpetrator remained living in the United States. So it's remarkable that we have this much information about this incident, but it's kind of due to the fact that this was one of those rare lone wolf attacks rather than an organized crime kind of attack or a nation state perpetrated attack.
Or is that all part of the PSYOP, and are they just a scapegoat to the
I know,
larger
right? I thought about that when I was doing my case study. I was in disbelief that how much information they had put out there, and there were even other gray hat people in conversations with this person saying, "You're going too far. You're not doing. What are you doing?" kind of thing, and they just kept going.
Doesn't surprise me.
right.
Well, I think that's a good segue into another legal related thing here. From the Department of Justice released that the Russian botnet was disrupted in an international cyber operation, and this was in our own backyard for some of us here in San Diego. And so essentially it was a botnet, Russian botnet known as RSOCKS, which had millions of computers under its control, and we partnered together with Germany, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom to dismantle that whole infrastructure. It originally started by targeting IoT devices, so that's Internet of Things, that it was going after, which was simple things like industrial control systems, time clocks. Our routers are back on the list again that we were just discussing.
Right.
The audio video streaming devices. I mean, how many times does anybody not patch those? I mean, they don't really do a good job of keeping up with those. And then my personal favorite is smart garage door opener. Are some of the initial attack vectors. But what they found was approximately back in 2017, they identified 300 25,000 compromised victims throughout the world with numerous devices within San Diego County, which I thought was very interesting here in our own backyard. But what they had hit was universities, a hotel, a TV studio, an electronics manufacturer, as well as home and individual home businesses and individuals that were hit in this. And so the government used, with permission, government controlled computers, in other words, like a honeypot that they deployed at 3 of the sites, and were able to identify 6 victims within San Diego and work to take down this whole network overall. So I think that's very interesting to see, going after Russia again, and then all the other countries that got involved to back this up, to help take these criminals down. Because I mean, this is the gateway in, right? You get the botnet, they control those devices, and essentially they have their whole network that they can utilize from that point moving forward.
Yeah,
Sam, are you familiar with this group?
The RSOCKS group?
Yeah,
No,
I hadn't heard of them.
Neither have I. I definitely have I've seen this kind of botnet before in action, but yeah, this specific group is definitely new to me. I haven't seen them on the forums.
Sorry, what were you saying, Derek?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting that we're still seeing these, joint efforts across the board, across nations and, countries and things like that, showing that, we still can kind of work together in some regards to really go after the much larger, cybercrime picture. I think, Brian, to your point, there's that, constant worry about the IoT devices and what's on your network. And, like you kind of jokingly saying, like these media players. And, I always ask people like, hey, like when was the last time you patched like your smart TV? And they're like, well, never. Like, exactly. I think that's the point, right? So it's always that case of, what's on your network? Are you patching it? Are you scanning for these things? If these things can't be patched, can we isolate them? So a lot of mitigation kind of tips and tricks there where we can look at. But these things are pretty large in scale, and it kind of almost ties back to the ISP story, right? About if you can get access to those ISPs, there's lots of quote unquote bots there too, right? And endpoints you can leverage. So definitely kind of going hand in hand on that one.
Well, I'm taking a look at an archive copy of their homepage right now. If you go to their homepage right now, it just has a disclaimer from the FBI saying that this website has been seized, or DOJ, I should say.
Sorry, I won't click your link.
Smart.
It's archive.org, trustarchive.org or not. But I'm looking at an archive copy of their website, and it looks like a legitimate business. I was thinking about the name RSOCKS, SOCKS proxy. And that's something that's commonly set up in order to route traffic or to be as a command and control server by an attacker here. And so they describe, it's got a beautiful website here with a Christmas theme from the date that I'm looking at it here. And it says the RSOCKS project, professional solutions for providing a personal privacy. Register now and try it for free. General service statistics, 150K residential properties, 290K exclusive properties, 40 personal proxy countries, 30 VPN servers, 30 VPN server countries. They've got their news page, very, very well polished website. And I can see how this could be used for good or for evil. And perhaps they were intending to cater to that more evil side of it here. But it just goes to show you, like it says, see our discussion on Black Hat World forums, exploit.in, nulled.to. So apparently they're making it relatively known up front that they are associated with the gray hat side of things at best, but quite a professional webpage here.
Yeah, I find it funny that it's not even on the Tor network. I mean, I'm sure there's a version of it, but it's just
Right.
Available on the public internet. So it's kind of interesting to see that they're hiding in plain sight here. And then to your point about running as a legitimate business, they even have bulk pricing. Like it's like $30 per day for access to 2,000 proxies, or $200 per day for access to 90,000 proxies. So they're coming up with legitimate business cases to meet people's budget. So
I prefer the exclusive plan myself.
yeah.
The all-inclusive built in, yeah,
If
unlimited.
you got a nation state bankrolling you, then go for it.
Well, it just shows, kind of goes back to our continuing topic that a lot of these are run like legit businesses, right? I mean, they have like a whole sales team, a tech support team, very well thought out pricing and methodical. So, they are like run as close to a legit business as possible, just on the other side of the coin, if you will. So, yeah.
It's like a front. It's like, hey, here are the legitimate services, but by the
Yeah.
way, if you want our access to our secret menu.
Right. Awesome. Well, I think everybody, this was a really good, show this week, and appreciate everyone's input. And to our viewers out there, like, subscribe, comment, let us know what you want to see out there, and yeah, looking forward to talking to everybody soon.
Right
See
on.
you
All
next
right,
time.
stay safe
All
out
right,
there.
take care. Stay safe in cyberspace. All right, take care.